Picture this. You're driving through Arizona at dusk, windows down, desert air whipping through your hair. The radio crackles, fades to static. Your GPS screen flickers once, twice, then dies, and in that sudden silence you hear it, your name, carried on the wind like a prayer from something that shouldn't know you exist. This isn't fiction. This is what happened to Marcus Chen 3 hours before he became number 387 of 432 people who vanished without a trace in the Arizona desert over the last 6 years. 432 souls. Gone, not lost hikers who took a wrong turn, not unprepared tourists overwhelmed by the heat. We're talking about Navy SEALs, park rangers who knew every trail like the lines on their palms, survival experts who could navigate by starlight alone, people who don't just disappear, yet in one remote stretch of the Sonoran Desert they walked into the sand and never walked out. No bodies, no bones, no goodbye notes scrawled in desperation, just an emptiness so complete it feels intentional. The locals won't talk about it, not directly, but if you buy them enough drinks, if you wait until the bar empties and the lights dim low, they'll tell you about the old stories, about petroglyphs that predate any known civilization, carved warnings that speak of a number, 432. They'll tell you about the Tohono O'odham prophecy, passed down through generations in hushed voices, that when the desert claims its 432nd soul, something ancient will wake. Something that's been counting, waiting, choosing its collection with the patience of geological time. Here's what should terrify you. The evidence suggests this isn't random. Every single disappearance shares details that shouldn't exist across unconnected cases. Phones that die at exactly 3:17 a.m. Compasses that spin wildly before pointing down. Final photos showing shadows that don't match any visible objects. And those who've gotten close enough to investigate, they either join the vanished or return changed, speaking in fragments about voices that know things they shouldn't, about sand that breathes, about seeing the sun rise twice in a single night. The authorities want you to believe it's coincidence, environmental hazards, poor planning, but environmental hazards don't arrange victims' belongings in perfect spirals. Poor planning doesn't explain why every search dog refuses to enter certain coordinates, whimpering and backing away from invisible boundaries. And coincidence sure as hell doesn't explain why the disappearances stopped cold the moment Claire Hemsworth became number 432 on April 19, 2024. This is real. The police reports are real. The satellite anomalies are real. The families still searching for answers are heartbreakingly, devastatingly real. And whether you believe in ancient prophecies or not, something in the Arizona desert has been collecting people with a purpose we're only beginning to understand. This is their story. This is our warning. This is the Arizona Desert Prophecy. Drive southwest from Phoenix for 3 hours, past the last gas station, beyond where your phone shows those reassuring signal bars, and you'll find yourself in a place that shouldn't exist on any map. The locals call it the Vanishing Zone, a roughly 150-mile radius of desert that sits like a wound between Maricopa County and the Tohono O'odham Nation. It's a place where the normal rules don't seem to apply, where even seasoned desert rats will take a 50-mile detour rather than cut through its heart. The nightmare began in December 2016 with Sarah Vega, a brilliant environmental science grad student from ASU. She'd spent months preparing for her solo research trip, studying soil samples near the reservation boundaries. Her professor later said she was meticulous, over-prepared to the point of paranoia. She carried 2 GPS units, a satellite phone, enough water for a week, and left detailed plans with 3 different people. On December 14th, her satellite phone sent its last ping from coordinates that would later become ground zero for our investigation. When search teams arrived 36 hours later, they found her entire camp intact. Tent stakes driven deep, sleeping bag unrolled, her journal open to a half-finished entry about unusual mineral deposits. Her boots sat side by side at the tent entrance, as if she'd just stepped out for a moment. But Sarah was gone. No footprints led away from camp, no signs of struggle. Even the forensics team couldn't explain how someone vanishes without disturbing a single grain of sand around their tent. That should have been the end, a tragic but isolated incident. Desert takes people sometimes. Everyone knows that. But 3 months later, it happened again. Then again. By the end of 2018, 89 people had vanished within the same zone, and the explanations were wearing thin. Flash floods don't happen in bone-dry washes. Dehydration doesn't make you fold your clothes neatly before disappearing, and mountain lions, well, they leave evidence. They leave something. The pattern revealed itself slowly, like a photograph developing in reverse. First came the timeline clustering. Disappearances spiking dramatically during the spring months of March through June, then again in the fall window of September and October. Meteorologists noted these periods coincide with extreme temperature fluctuations, when the desert can swing 40 degrees between day and night, but temperature changes don't explain why every single missing person's LA. This known location, when mapped, creates a spiral pattern centered on a region even the cartographers seem reluctant to document. By 2020, online communities had connected dots the authorities refused to see. Reddit threads with titles like Arizona's Bermuda Triangle and The Desert That Eats People began accumulating evidence faster than moderators could delete them. Users reported that Google Earth showed different images of the area depending on when you accessed it. Satellite photos from certain dates showed structures or formations that didn't appear in others. Some claimed their screens would flicker when they zoomed too close to specific coordinates, as if the data itself was corrupted. The indigenous communities know something, but getting them to share it is like pulling teeth from stone. Elders speak in metaphors about places where the earth has mouths and warn their children about the spiral that walks. They have names for regions within the zone that translate to concepts English doesn't quite capture, places where time becomes water and the ground remembers. When pressed, they simply say these are old stories, older than America, older than maps, older than the idea that humans are the only things that hunger. Border Patrol agents working the region have their own stories, shared only in encrypted messages and off-the-record meetings. They talk about heat signatures that appear and vanish on thermal imaging, moving too fast to be human, too deliberate to be animal. About drone footage that comes back scrambled, showing impossible geometries in the landscape. About the night in 2019 when 6 different agents reported their equipment simultaneously failing at exactly 3:17 a.m., their radios erupting with a sound one described as like breathing, but inside out. The numbers kept climbing through 2021, 2022, 2023. Local law enforcement stopped holding press conferences. Federal agencies began classifying reports. Families were told to stop asking questions, that investigations were ongoing. A word that means nothing when you're missing a daughter, a brother, a best friend. By early 2024, the count had reached 431. The desert was one soul away from something, though no one could say what. The vanishing zone isn't just a place anymore. It's a hunger wearing the mask of empty land, a question mark carved into the earth that swallows anyone who gets too close to an answer. And somewhere in those 100,000 square miles of silence, 432 stories ended without endings, leaving only the shape of their absence behind. They have names. Rachel Martinez, the marathon runner who could navigate by constellations. David Park, the former Marine who survived 2 tours in Afghanistan, only to disappear during a routine camping trip 40 miles from his house. Emma Thompson, the nurse who spent her weekends volunteering for desert rescue operations, who knew every danger sign, every survival protocol. These aren't statistics. They're people who laughed at dinner tables, who had favorite songs, who left behind voicemails their families still play just to hear their voices again. The demographics tell a story that makes no sense until you realize it makes too much sense. Nearly 60% were Arizona natives, people who grew up with the desert's moods, who knew when a cloud meant rain and when it meant run. They weren't tourists fumbling with paper maps or city folks underestimating the heat. These were people whose grandfathers taught them to read. Animal tracks whose mothers packed extra water even for grocery runs. The desert was in their blood and still it took them. Age-wise, they cluster between 19 and 44. Prime years, strong years, the years when you think you're invincible but you're not stupid about it. The gender split runs almost even, destroying any theory about targeting vulnerability. The psychological profiles, cobbled together from social media posts and family interviews, show no consistent markers for depression, No cries for help disguised as adventure. These were people with plans, with futures, with dinner reservations they never made it to. But it's the patterns within patterns that make investigators wake up at 3 a.m. in cold sweats. Over 70% were traveling alone. Not unusual for experienced hikers, but unsettling when you realize how many broke their own rules to do it. Marcus Chen always hiked with his brother, always, except for that last Tuesday. Sarah Vega had a standing rule about solo trips, never more than 10 miles from civilization, but her final coordinates put her 23 miles deep. It's as if something called them further than they meant to go, deeper than they planned to venture. The social media posts haunt us with their normalcy. Instagram photos of sunrise over red rocks, Facebook check-ins at trailheads, final tweets about needing to disconnect for a while. But look closer and the wrongness creeps in. In at least a dozen final photos, there are anomalies, shadows that fall the wrong direction, light sources that don't match the sun's position, reflections in water where no water should exist. Jessica Wu's last selfie shows her smiling at Elephant Rock, but behind her left shoulder, enhanced imaging reveals what looks like a figure standing in the heat shimmer. Her parents say she was hiking alone. Then there's Erica Monroe's blog, still live, still drawing visitors who leave comments like prayers. Her final post, timestamped at 2:47 a.m. on March 15, 2021, titled "The Ground is Breathing," describes a sound she'd been hearing for 3 nights, a rhythmic pulsing she thought was her own heartbeat until she held her breath and it continued. She wrote about feeling watched by something that doesn't use eyes, about finding her equipment moved while she slept, about voices in a language that sounded like wind trying to form words. The search teams found her camera 12 days later, memory card wiped clean except for a single corrupted file that, when recovered, showed 3 seconds of darkness and a sound forensic analysts refused to classify. Travis DeWitt's case adds another layer of dread. A paranormal investigator with a modest YouTube following, he'd been documenting what he called energy convergence points throughout the Southwest. His final live stream, watched by 847 people in real time, shows him walking through the desert at dusk, describing electromagnetic readings that shouldn't be possible outside a laboratory. At timestamp 44:17, he stops mid-sentence, turns to something off camera and says, "Oh, you're early." The stream continues for another 6 minutes of empty desert before cutting out. Viewers reported that their screens showed different things. Some saw a figure approaching. Others saw the landscape folding in on itself. Many saw nothing but felt an overwhelming urge to close their laptops and lock their doors. The triangle symbols tie together cases separated by years and miles. Carved into rock faces, scratched into abandoned car hoods, even traced in the sand in photos taken by other hikers who didn't realize what they'd captured. Always the same, 3 triangles nested inside each other, smallest to largest, with a spiral in the center. Dr. Patricia Huang, a symbologist who studied the markings before her research grant was mysteriously pulled, claimed they resembled pre-Columbian glyphs, meaning threshold or passage between. She stopped returning calls after receiving what she described as visits from people who weren't there. 6 different journals, recovered from 6 different sites, contain variations of the same phrase. They come in whispers, not footsteps. Maria Santos wrote it in Spanish, James Crow Feather in Tohono O'odham, Liu Wei in Mandarin. Different languages, same meaning, same creeping dread of something approaching without sound, without form, without any of the warnings evolution taught us to recognize. The vanished weren't random selections from some cosmic lottery. They were chosen, for what we don't know. But when you line up their photos, all 432 of them, and stare long enough, you start to see it. The same look in their eyes in those final pictures, not fear exactly, something closer to recognition, as if in their last moments they finally understood something the rest of us are still too lucky or too ignorant to grasp. They were people like us, until they weren't, until they became part of something larger, older, and hungrier than any of us want to believe exists. And the most terrifying part? Looking at their faces, reading their words, tracing their final steps, you can't shake the feeling that they're not gone. They're just elsewhere, waiting, part of a collection that needed exactly 432 pieces to be complete. When you're staring at 432 empty spaces where people used to be, the human mind does what it's designed to do. It reaches for explanations, even bad ones, because they're better than the alternative, better than admitting that sometimes the universe shows its teeth and we don't understand what we're looking at. The theories surrounding the vanishing zone range from mundane to maddening, each one a desperate attempt to force chaos into a shape we can fight. The environmental explanation comes first, wrapped in the comforting language of science and statistics. The Sonoran Desert doesn't forgive mistakes, temperatures that can cook an egg on rock at noon, then drop low enough to kill you with hypothermia by midnight. Dehydration sneaks up like a thief, stealing your judgment before it takes your life. Flash floods can transform a dry wash into a liquid grave in minutes. Abandoned mine shafts dot the landscape like hungry mouths. On paper, it almost works. Almost. Until you remember that bodies don't vanish. Desert victims leave traces, sun-bleached bones, torn clothing, circling vultures drawing maps in the sky. The desert kills, yes, but it doesn't erase. It doesn't collect. It doesn't arrange your belongings in perfect spirals before making you disappear. So the theories grow darker, more human. Drug cartels running routes through the borderlands, using the zone's reputation to mask their activities. It's not impossible. The region sits in a jurisdictional nightmare between federal, state, and tribal lands where cooperation comes hard and secrets bury easy. Off-record conversations with DEA contacts mention unusual activity patterns and operational anomalies in the area, but cartels leave messages. They want you to know what happens when you cross them. They do, and make people vanish like smoke. They make examples, and they certainly don't whisper your name in voices that sound like your dead grandmother. The serial killer theory gained traction after someone noticed the ritualistic positioning of abandoned gear, the way water bottles were often found arranged in triangular patterns, how victims' journals, when recovered, were always open to the last entry, weighted down with stones placed precisely at the corners. A profiler from Quantico, speaking on condition of anonymity, suggested a highly organized individual with extensive knowledge of the terrain and possible religious or mystical delusions. But serial killers have patterns, signatures, escalation. They don't take exactly 432 people and then stop. They don't leave areas that make search dogs whimper and back away. They don't cause electromagnetic interference that crashes drones and scrambles satellite feeds. Then we venture into the spaces between explanations where indigenous knowledge meets quantum physics and nobody's comfortable with what they find. The Tohono O'odham elders speak of places where the desert thinks and the earth remembers. They describe boundaries that aren't meant to be crossed, not because of what's on the other side, but because the act of crossing changes you. Dr. Robert Keane, a theoretical physicist who studied the area before his university suddenly reassigned him, documented magnetic anomalies that suggested dimensional membrane weakness. His papers, leaked online before being scrubbed, theorized about naturally occurring Einstein-Rosen bridges and temporal displacement fields. He used a lot of words to dance around what he really meant, that space-time itself might be broken in the zone. The ancient prophecy threads through everything like a poisoned river. Researchers who've studied pre-Columbian sites in the area report finding the number 432 encoded in architectural measurements, in the arrangement of ceremonial objects, in oral traditions that predate written history. Dr. Sarah Blackwood, an archaeologist whose funding was cut after she published preliminary findings, discovered that 432 Hz is a frequency that appears in various indigenous healing ceremonies, but also in recordings made near disappearance sites, a subsonic pulse that shows up on equipment but not in human hearing range. She theorized that the disappearances might be vibrational events, that certain frequencies could unlock matter from its standard state. Her colleagues called her crazy. Then she stopped returning their calls. Then she stopped existing in any database we can access. The government involvement theory would be easier to dismiss if the evidence wasn't so aggressively absent. FOIA requests don't just get denied, they disappear from filing systems. Satellite imagery of the zone shows different things depending on when and how you access it, as if multiple versions exist simultaneously. Military contractors have been spotted using equipment that doesn't match any known surveying or construction purpose. Local pilots report no-fly zones that appear and vanish from official charts. Something is being hidden, but whether it's causing the disappearances or studying them remains locked behind classifications that shouldn't exist for a missing persons case. And then there's Desert Prophet 1977, whose posts chronicled an obsession that might have been madness or might have been clarity. He claimed the disappearances followed mathematical patterns, not just in timing but in the victims' birthdays, the coordinates of their last known locations, even the number of letters in their names. He wrote about harmonic convergence points and human frequency matching, and the desert tuning itself to 432. His final posts described dreams of walking backwards through sand that flowed upward, of seeing the vanished standing in neat rows beneath the earth, waiting for something. His account was deleted 3 days after the 432nd disappearance, the IP address traced to a location that doesn't exist on any map. Every theory has holes, every explanation breaks down at the edges. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we're not meant to understand it in the way we understand weather patterns or criminal psychology. Maybe the zone operates on logic that predates human reasoning, follows rules written before we invented the concept of rules. The only thing we know for certain is that 432 people walked into the desert and became part of something our languages don't have words for. The most terrifying theory, that there is no theory, that what's happening in the zone is exactly what it appears to be, an impossibility that doesn't care whether we believe in it or not, a hunger that counted to 432 and then, what? Stopped, transformed, began something we won't recognize until it's too late? The silence since the last disappearance might be the most ominous answer of all, because in stories like this, when the monster stops feeding, it's usually because it's full. And when monsters get full, they grow, they change, they become something worse than hungry. Evidence is supposed to clarify, to illuminate, to provide answers. But what emerged from the vanishing zone does the opposite. It takes what we think we know about reality and tears it into pieces too strange to reassemble. These aren't grainy Bigfoot photos or shaky UFO videos. This is raw data that makes seasoned investigators quit their jobs, that turns skeptics into believers and believers into people who wish they'd never looked. Nina Holloway wanted to be famous. Not Hollywood famous, but internet famous. The kind where you document your spiritual journey and sell healing crystals to followers who call you sister. On May 3, 2021, she aimed her camera at the desert and started what LD become the most watched disappearance in history. The live stream begins predictably, Nina talking about energy vortexes, waving sage smoke at the camera, her voice that practiced blend of mystical and relatable. For 20 minutes, it's every other desert spirituality video you've scrolled past. Then, at 20:47, she stops mid-sentence about chakra alignment. Her eyes track something behind the camera. The smile fades. She whispers, "Did you hear that?" and walks out of frame. The camera keeps rolling on empty desert for 97 seconds that feel like hours. Then the corruption hits, not a clean cut, but a writhing digital decay that forensic analysts say shouldn't be possible with modern streaming technology. In the final frame, enhanced and slowed, something tall stands in the heat shimmer, but it's not standing, it's arriving. Unfolding from space that wasn't there before. The stream dies. Nina's car was found 13 miles from the zone's center, doors locked, keys in the ignition, her sage bundle still smoking on the dashboard. The audio from Daniel Reyes haunts in a different way. A volunteer searcher with 16 years of experience, he carried a digital recorder to document grid coordinates during a 5-day sweep for missing hiker Patricia Vance. Most of the recording is mundane. Footsteps on gravel, radio chatter, wind across the mic. But at 2:41 a.m. on the third night, something else speaks. The voice is clear, close, intimate as a lover's whisper. "You followed them here." Forensic audio analysis confirmed it matches no one in the search party. The frequency pattern shows characteristics of a human larynx, but modulated in ways that suggest either electronic manipulation or a throat structure that shouldn't exist. Daniel's breathing on the recording accelerates. You can hear him stumbling, running, crashing through brush. The next morning, he quit the search team. When asked why, he said, "Because it wasn't talking to me through the recorder, it was talking to me through my teeth." He moved to Maine 6 months later and refuses to speak about the desert. The GoPro footage attributed to ultra-runner Max Adler defies every attempt at debunking. 43 seconds of chaos, sand, sky, boots pounding, ragged breathing. Then the camera swings skyward and captures something impossible, stars in configurations that don't exist, not from Earth, not from anywhere astronomers can identify. The Pleiades are wrong. Orion is backwards, and between the familiar constellations, new stars burn in patterns that hurt to perceive, as if the sky itself has been rewritten. The video ends with a sound like tearing metal and a shadow that moves across the sand like a wave of nothing. Max's girlfriend received the file through his cloud storage 3 days after he vanished. She says she's watched it exactly once and now sleeps with every light in her house on. Physical evidence tells its own version of impossible. The bone altar found in 2022 wasn't built from animal remains. Forensic analysis confirmed that much, but the bones themselves showed cellular structures that don't match any known species. They're almost familiar, like looking at a human skeleton through warped glass. The red cloth in the center, marked with 3 burnt rings, contained trace elements of meteoric iron and organic compounds that carbon dating places at simultaneously 50 years old and 5,000 years old. The physicist who analyzed it quit her position and now teaches high school chemistry, saying only that some questions shouldn't have answers. Lucas Brent's thermal drone footage revealed the desert's hidden signature. Flying a grid pattern over the southern zone edge, his equipment captured a massive spiral carved into the earth, invisible to the naked eye but glowing in thermal imaging as if the ground itself runs several degrees hotter along the pattern. The spiral measures exactly 432 meters in diameter. When he tried to fly directly over the center, his drone's navigation system inverted. Up became down, north became south. The footage shows the drone fighting to right itself before the feed cuts to static. The drone was recovered 50 miles east, its memory card surgically removed, its GPS history showing it had somehow traveled there in less than 30 seconds. But perhaps the most disturbing evidence is the handwritten note found in 2023, wedged beneath carefully stacked stones. The handwriting starts controlled, measured. If someone finds this, do not trust the voices. They shift shape. They sound like someone you love. But as the note continues, the writing deteriorates, words overlapping, languages mixing. I watched the sun rise twice in one night. Time runs sideways here. I don't know what day it is. The sand remembers everything. They're all here under the spiral waiting. I can see my own grave and I'm already in it. I don't think I'm supposed to exist anymore. The paper itself defies analysis. It appears to be standard notebook paper but contains wood pulp from trees that went extinct 10,000 years ago. No missing person report matches the handwriting. It's as if someone who never existed left a warning about a place that shouldn't be real. Every piece of evidence shares one characteristic. It breaks the rules. Not just the rules of investigation or forensics, but the rules of how reality operates. Cameras capture things that weren't there. Audio records voices that can't exist. Physics. All objects show properties that make physicists stare at their equations and wonder where they went wrong. The evidence doesn't lead to answers. It leads to a growing understanding that the zone operates on principles we're not equipped to comprehend. That whatever took those 432 people might not have taken them somewhere else, but somewhen else. Or perhaps into a state of being our language can only approximate with words like vanished. The most chilling realization? This evidence exists only because it escaped. For every recording that made it out, every note recovered, every anomaly documented, how many others were swallowed by the same force that took the people? We're not looking at evidence of disappearances anymore. We're looking at the few fragments that somehow slipped through the cracks of something much larger, much older, and much more complete than we want to admit. The first rule of investigating the vanishing zone becomes clear within days of asking questions. Nobody wants you asking questions. It starts subtle. Phone calls that don't get returned, emails that bounce back from addresses that worked yesterday, offices that are suddenly closed for renovation. But push harder, and the subtlety evaporates like water on hot stone. Because somewhere between the first disappearance and the 432nd, the machinery of silence kicked into gear, and it's been running ever since. Emily Ferris learned this the hard way. A freelance journalist with 10 years of borderland reporting under her belt, she'd covered everything from immigration to drug trafficking without flinching. But the Vanishing Zone story grabbed her differently. She spent months building sources, mapping disappearances, filing FOIA requests that came back so redacted they looked like abstract art. Her editor at the Phoenix Tribune later said Emily had been excited, said she was close to breaking the real story behind the disappearances. Her final article draft recovered from her laptop was titled, "They Don't Want Us Asking." The document cuts off mid-sentence. The coordination between agencies suggests knowledge of. Emily vanished 2 days before publication. Her apartment showed no signs of struggle. Her car was in the parking lot. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, battery full, showing 17 missed calls from her mother. The Tribune killed the story and won't say why. The official response follows a script so consistent, it feels rehearsed. Local law enforcement classifies each case individually, refusing to acknowledge patterns. Unrelated incidents, unfortunate accidents, personal choice to disappear. Sheriff Martinez of Maricopa County gave the same statement to 16 different news outlets over 3 years, word for word, like he was reading from a teleprompter installed behind his eyes. When a reporter from Channel 12 pressed him about the statistical impossibility of this many unrelated disappearances, the feed cut to static. The station claimed technical difficulties. The reporter was reassigned to cover school board meetings. FOIA requests tell their own story of obstruction. Documents arrive so censored they're more blackout than text. Entire pages missing with no explanation. File numbers that don't correspond to any known classification system. One batch came with a handwritten note. Section 7Q protocols in effect, no further inquiries. Section 7Q doesn't exist in any government manual anyone can find. 3 researchers who've pushed hardest for disclosure have had their homes burglarized. Nothing stolen, just hard drives wiped, research notes disappeared, family photos rearranged. The message is clear: we're watching, and we can reach you. Border Patrol's involvement raises more questions than it answers. Off-record sources describe standing orders to avoid certain coordinates, zones that appear and disappear from patrol maps without explanation. Agent Rameyer, speaking through encrypted channels, reported seeing heat signatures that don't move like humans, don't register as animals, don't behave like anything with a heartbeat should. He described whole sections of desert that patrol vehicles refuse to enter. Engines dying, electronics failing, compasses spinning like tornado weather. His superiors ordered psychological evaluation after he filed a report about structures that were there on Monday and gone on Tuesday, but the sand showed no signs they ever existed. Ramirez transferred to Maine. When asked why, he said, "Because the Atlantic Ocean doesn't whisper your service number while you're trying to sleep. The deeper you dig, the more you find connections that shouldn't exist." Satellite imagery of the zone shows inconsistencies that NASA explains as data processing errors, but the errors always obscure the same coordinates. Google Earth updates for the region lag years behind everywhere else, and when they do update, previous versions become inaccessible. One programmer who tried to archive historical imagery found his entire Google account deleted, his IP banned, his name flagged across every major tech platform. He posted once on a dark web forum, "They're not hiding what's there, they're hiding what used to be there." Military involvement stays carefully deniable but impossible to ignore. Unmarked helicopters fly grid patterns at night, running dark except for infrared that locals say looks like they're searching for something specific. Contractors from companies that don't exist on any business registry have been spotted with equipment that veterans say they've never seen. Devices that look like ground-penetrating radar had a child with a particle accelerator. When questioned, they flash badges from agencies that a congressional aide confirms exist in budgets but not in any organizational chart we can access. And the media silence might be the loudest alarm of all. 432 disappearances should dominate news cycles, spawn documentaries, launch congressional inquiries. Instead, coverage stays local, fragmentary, sanitized. Major outlets that pick up the story invariably drop it within days, journalists reassigned. Editors suddenly concerned about editorial standards. One CNN producer, speaking off record after 3 whiskeys, said the kill order came from so far up the ladder they need oxygen masks. Online content faces worse. YouTube channels terminated, Reddit threads scrubbed, Facebook groups vanishing overnight. Even mentioning specific coordinate combinations in posts triggers automatic removal. Dr. Patricia Huang's research shutdown remains the most blatant academic suppression. Her work on the triangular symbols found near disappearance sites had garnered international attention until her university suddenly cited funding reallocation and shut down her entire department, not just her project, the whole department. 14 academics out of work because one was looking too closely at symbols that don't mean anything. Huang's personal research disappeared from her office, her home, her cloud storage. She received 1 email before her account was terminated. Some patterns are proprietary. She now teaches English in South Korea and won't discuss her previous work. The question morphs from what happened to these people to what are they so desperate to hide? Every barrier thrown up, every document destroyed, every witness relocated paints a picture of knowledge being actively suppressed. This isn't bureaucratic incompetence, it's coordinated containment. Someone, somewhere, knows exactly what's happening in the vanishing zone. They've known long enough to build protocols, to embed response teams, to create a system designed not to find the truth, but to bury it deeper than any desert grave. And maybe that's the most terrifying revelation of all. Not that 432 people vanished into some unknowable phenomenon, but that the unknown is actually known. Classified, stamped, filed away in servers you'll never access, discussed in rooms you'll never enter, by people whose names you'll never learn. They know why the desert counts, they know what happens at 432, and they've decided that you, that all of us, are better off not knowing. But secrets this size don't stay buried. They leak through the cracks like blood through sand. And sometimes the cover-up tells you more than the truth ever could. Because you don't build walls this high unless what's behind them could bring everything crashing down. You don't silence this many voices unless they were about to say something that would change the world, or end it. Claire Hemsworth wasn't supposed to be special, a 3rd-grade teacher from Yuma who spent her weekends grading papers and hiking easy trails. She had a cat named Mittens, a Honda Civic with too many miles, and a sister who worried she wasn't dating enough. Nothing about her suggested she'd become the key that turned a lock 6 years in the making. But on April 19, 2024, Claire became number 432, and the desert changed its rules. The morning started like thousands before it. Claire texted her sister Ashley at 7:23 a.m. Beautiful day for Echo Rim, should have cell service most of the way. She'd found the trail on a forum post that no one can locate anymore, recommended by a user whose account predated the site itself. The photo she sent at 4:52 p.m. shows her at the overlook, smiling, unaware that she's standing at the edge of something ancient. But look closer at that photo, really look, and you'll see it. The shadow crossing the rocks behind her doesn't match anything in frame. It falls upward, defying the afternoon sun. It reaches toward her like fingers made of darkness. The rescue response was faster this time. They knew the count. Everyone watching knew the count. Search teams deployed within 6 hours, following her phone's last ping to coordinates that overlapped with 3 previous disappearances. They found her car at the trailhead, windows cracked for ventilation, water bottle still cold in the cup holder. Her daypack lay exactly 1.3 miles up the trail, contents arranged in a perfect spiral, energy bars pointing outward like clock hands, her phone in the center, screen cracked in a spiderweb pattern that looked deliberate, but the phone still worked. The last video, time-stamped 4:58 p.m., shows 3 seconds of sand spiraling upward like a reverse hourglass before cutting to black. Then the world tilted off its axis. The moment Claire's name was added to the list, the moment she officially became the 452nd confirmed vanishing, things that had been sleeping woke up. Seismographs across southern Arizona registered 5 microquakes in perfect sequence, each one deeper than the last, as if something was stretching beneath the surface. The Palo Verde nuclear station reported inexplicable power fluctuations. Radio telescopes at Kitt Peak Observatory detected a signal from empty space that lasted exactly 432 seconds before vanishing like it never existed. The dreams started that night. Not to everyone, but to enough people that emergency rooms reported a spike in admissions for panic attacks and sleep disturbances. The dreams were consistent: tunnels of breathing sand, spirals that descended through time instead of space, and voices calling names in languages that predated human speech. Maria Gonzalez in Tucson dreamed of her dead grandmother standing in a line of shadows, all facing the same direction, all waiting. Tom Bradley, in Phoenix, saw himself walking backward through the desert, leaving footprints that filled with stars. Children drew pictures of the underground place where all the gone people stay, their crayons mapping geometries that hurt to perceive. Wildlife behavior shifted overnight. Coyotes that had howled in the desert for generations fell silent. Birds flew in spirals that mirrored the thermal imagery patterns. Rattlesnakes were found arranged in perfect circles, alive but motionless, as if listening to something beneath the ground. 3 separate trail cameras captured the same impossibility: shadows moving without sources, sliding across the landscape like oil on water, all flowing toward the zone's center. The voices came next. Hikers within 50 miles of the zone began reporting the same phenomenon, their own names whispered from nowhere, growing louder the longer they ignored it. Sarah Mitchell recorded herself on a trail 20 miles from the nearest disappearance site. "It knows my middle name, the one my mother only used when she was angry. How does the wind know that name?" She turned back. Others didn't. 4 more people vanished in the week after Claire, but their names don't count toward the prophecy. The door was already opening. Local Tohono O'odham elders broke their silence, but only to say it was too late. Elder Joseph Moreno, speaking through his grandson's translation, said simply, "The number is complete. The spiral has closed. What sleeps below counts its collection." When asked what happens next, he replied, "The same thing that happened before, the last time the desert counted to completion, before your maps, before your cities, when this land had different stars." He wouldn't elaborate, but historical research found similar counting patterns in petroglyphs dating back 900 years, always ending at 432, always followed by imagery of the sky opening like a mouth. Electronic interference exploded across the region. Cell towers dropped calls mid-sentence. GPS units directed drivers into empty desert that maps insisted were highways. Digital cameras captured images their memory cards couldn't explain. Faces in rock formations that weren't there seconds before. Human silhouettes standing where no one stood. The interference followed a pattern, expanding outward from the zone's center like ripples in reverse, pulling signals inward instead of broadcasting out. Then came the stillness. 1 week after Claire vanished, the disappearances stopped. Not slowed, stopped. The desert that had been hunting for 6 years suddenly lost its appetite. Search and rescue teams reported an oppressive quiet in the zone, a silence so complete it felt like being underground. The wind died. Animals avoided the area entirely. Even insects seemed to detour around invisible boundaries. One rescuer described it like the desert is holding its breath, like it's full, like it's digesting. But the most disturbing evidence came from satellite thermal imaging on April 26th, exactly 1 week after Claire became 432. The spiral pattern that had been slowly warming over 6 years suddenly blazed with heat. Not fire hot, but fever hot, body temperature hot. The pattern pulsed 3 times, each pulse exactly 432 seconds apart. Then it went cold, colder than the surrounding desert, cold like a door left open. To winter, NASA classified the images immediately, but not before someone leaked frames showing what looked like a massive eye opening in the earth, pupil dark and patient, looking up at the satellites looking down. The prophecy was specific: 432 souls to complete the collection, a number written in stone by people who saw this happen before, who tried to warn us in the only language that survives centuries, mathematics carved in rock. They knew the desert's hunger had a limit, a threshold, a point of transformation. They counted bodies like counting down to an event they couldn't prevent, only document. We know what the prophecy said. When the desert reclaims 432 souls, a gate will open. What we don't know is what comes through that gate, or if the gate opens to let something out, or to let something in. The silence, since Claire might be satisfaction, a predator resting after a successful hunt, or it might be preparation, a chrysalis stage before something emerges changed. The desert has its collection, the number is complete, the spiral is closed. And in the stillness that follows, in the waiting that feels like the pause between heartbeats, we're left with a single terrifying certainty. Whatever the desert was counting toward, it's here. This is where most stories end, but that's the thing about the desert. It doesn't believe in endings. It believes in cycles, in spirals that close only to open again, in silence that speaks louder than screams. You followed this trail through 432 vanished souls, through evidence that breaks reality, through cover-ups that reach higher than we can see. But here's what should keep you awake tonight. This isn't history. This isn't some dusty legend filed away in folklore. This is happening now in the same world where you're reading these words, under the same sky that watched Claire Hemsworth become the final number in an ancient count. If you live in the Southwest, if you've driven those long, empty stretches of highway where cell service dies and the radio plays nothing but static, then you already know the feeling. That sensation of being watched by something that doesn't need eyes. That moment when your GPS glitches and for just a second, you're nowhere on any map. Maybe you've heard your name carried on the wind when no one else was there to speak it. Maybe you've seen shadows fall the wrong direction or felt the ground pulse beneath your feet like a massive heartbeat. We need to hear from you, because here's what we've learned after months of investigation. The official story is tissue paper over a hurricane. For every documented disappearance, there are dozens of near misses, close calls, people who turned back just in time, people who felt the pull but resisted, people who saw something that made them drive 3 hours out of their way rather than take that shortcut through the desert again. Your stories aren't anecdotes. They're data points in a pattern we're still trying to understand. They're proof that whatever claimed those 432 people is still out there, still watching, still choosing. Drop your experiences in the comments below. Tell us about the time your compass spun wild or your phone showed coordinates that don't exist. Share the dreams that came after you hiked too close to the zone, the voices that knew things they shouldn't, the feeling of being followed by something that matched your pace perfectly but never showed itself. Every detail matters because somewhere in the accumulation of all our fragments might be the key to understanding what the desert wants and why it stopped at exactly 432. Maybe you're one of the investigators who got too close and felt the pushback, the suddenly canceled funding, the visits from people with no names and too much authority. Maybe you're former military who saw things in the desert that never made it into any report. Maybe you're indigenous and carry stories your grandparents made you promise never to tell, until now. Because silence is what let this happen. Silence is what let 432 people vanish while the world looked away. And silence is what something out there is counting on to keep its secrets buried deeper than bones. We're building a database of experiences, mapping the edges of whatever phenomenon turns people into absences. Every story shared, every pattern recognized, every connection made brings us closer to an answer. But more than that, it serves as a warning. Because if the prophecy is real, if 432 was just the first phase of something larger, then what comes next might not be content to wait for volunteers. It might come looking, and the more we know about how it chooses, how it calls, how it collects, the better chance we have of recognizing it when it comes for us. Subscribe to this channel if you want to follow this investigation deeper. We're not done. We're tracking new disappearances in other desert regions, similar patterns, similar silence, similar official denial. We're analyzing Aboriginal accounts from Australia that describe counting systems carved in stone, prophecies about the land reclaiming exact numbers of souls. We're connecting with researchers who found these patterns repeated across cultures that never interacted, all pointing to the same impossible conclusion, that the Earth itself might be conscious, might be hungry, might be collecting us for reasons we're only beginning to glimpse. The mainstream media won't touch this story. The authorities want it buried, but you're different. You've made it this far because some part of you recognizes the truth in these impossibilities. Some part of you has always known that the world is stranger than we're taught, that ancient warnings weren't superstitions, but survival instructions, that there are places on this Earth where different rules apply. You're here because you'd rather know than sleep peacefully in ignorance. Next week, we're releasing exclusive footage from a source inside Border Patrol, thermal imaging that shows what actually happens in the zone after dark. We've got audio recordings from the families of the vanished, messages left on voicemails that shouldn't exist, final words that don't make sense until you understand the context of the prophecy. We're going deeper into the indigenous connections, the mathematical patterns, the possibility that 4 and 32 wasn't random but resonant, a frequency that opens doors between what is and what shouldn't be. But for now, we leave you with this. Every night, somewhere in the Arizona desert, the wind still calls names. The ground still pulses with rhythms that predate human heartbeats. The shadows still fall upward when no one's watching. And beneath it all, in spirals carved by time and intention, something that collected 432 souls waits with the patience of stone. It's not hunting anymore. It's not calling. It's just waiting. And the only question that matters is what it's waiting for. Watch the skies. They're not always showing you the same stars. Count your steps. Certain numbers carry weight in places where math meets magic. And if you hear your name whispered in the wind, spoken by voices that sound like everyone you've ever loved, don't answer, don't investigate, don't become number 433. Because the desert might have its collection, but that doesn't mean it's done collecting. It just means it's ready for whatever comes next. Until we meet again in next week's investigation, remember, you're not paranoid if the desert really is watching. You're not crazy if the shadows really do move. You're just awake in a world that prefers you sleeping. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and whatever you do, stay out of the vanishing zone.